2 days ago, I woke up to a flood of pictures on my phone, my daughter, all smiles, dressed in white, announcing her surprise wedding. But I wasn't invited. Instead of joy, an unbearable ache swallowed me whole. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is June. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone in a tiny apartment on the Lower East Side of New York City. The sounds of honking taxi cabs and distant sirens have become the soundtrack to a routine I barely endure anymore. Every morning, pale light seeps through my cracked window, painting shadows across my worn kitchen table. I shuffle to the kitchen in my faded blue robe, breathing in the familiar mixture of stale coffee and yesterday's loneliness. The phone sits there on the counter, silent as always. No good morning texts. No calls asking how I slept. Just the harsh buzz of notifications from social media, reminding me of a world that seems to move on without me. That morning was different though. That morning, my phone exploded with images that would shatter what was left of my heart. There she was. My daughter Sarah, radiant in a flowing white dress, her arm linked with a man I'd never met. The caption read, "Surprise. We did it. Best day of our lives." The photos showed a beautiful ceremony in what looked like Central Park, surrounded by friends I didn't recognize and family members who had somehow found the time to attend. Except me. Her own mother. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her happiness. I stared at those photos until my eyes blurred with tears. My hands shook as I scrolled through dozens of images, the cake cutting, the first dance, the toasts from people who seemed to matter more than I did. In every single photo, Sarah looked happier than I'd seen her in years. And I wasn't there to witness it. The contrast cut through me like a knife. Just last week, I'd been looking through an old photo album, touching every memory of her childhood. There was Sarah at 5, gap-toothed and giggling as she held up a handmade Mother's Day card. "I love you more than ice cream, Mommy," it said in crooked purple letters. There was Sarah at 10, hugging me tight after her first school play, whispering, "You're the best mom ever." There was Sarah at 18, crying in my arms after her first heartbreak, promising she'd never forget how much I meant to her. But somewhere between those tender memories and this cold morning, I had become invisible. Expendable. Not even worth a phone call to say, "Mom, I'm getting married." I remember setting the phone down with trembling fingers and walking to my bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked ancient. When did these deep lines etch themselves around my eyes? When did my shoulders start to curve forward like I was carrying an invisible weight? When did I start looking so forgotten? The apartment felt smaller that morning. The walls seemed to press in on me, filled with framed photos of Sarah through the years, each one now a reminder of how little I apparently meant to her. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant rumble of subway trains carrying people to lives that mattered, people who were invited to important moments, people who weren't forgotten by their own children. I sat heavily in my worn armchair, the one Sarah used to curl up in when she visited. But those visits had become rarer and rarer over the years. First monthly, then every few months, then just holidays, then not even that. Each time I asked when she'd come again, I got the same vague answer, "Soon, Mom. I'm just really busy right now." But apparently, she wasn't too busy to plan a wedding. She wasn't too busy to invite dozens of other people. She was just too busy for me. That's when the real pain hit. Not just the hurt of being excluded, but the crushing realization of how long I'd been disappearing from her life. How long had I been making excuses for her? How long had I been telling myself that her distance was just temporary, just stress, just the demands of modern life? The truth was staring me in the face through those wedding photos. I hadn't mattered enough to be included in the most important day of her life. I was her mother, the woman who had given her life, raised her, sacrificed everything for her happiness. And I wasn't even worth a phone call. I've given everything to that family. Everything. Every paycheck, every dream, every ounce of strength I had went into making their lives better while mine slowly withered away. After Sarah's father walked out when she was 12, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken promises, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Midnight shifts at Murphy's Diner on Houston Street, cleaning offices in Midtown during the day, and weekend shifts at a grocery store in Queens. My hands were always raw from cleaning solutions. My feet ached constantly from standing for 16-hour days. I lived on 3 hours of sleep and instant coffee, but I never complained. Not once. Because every sacrifice was worth it if it meant Sarah could have the life I never did. I wanted her to go to college, to have choices, to never know the bone-deep exhaustion of working yourself to death just to survive. I remember the night I calculated how much money I'd need for her college fund. I was sitting at this same kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements, my calculator worn smooth from use. The number seemed impossible, tens of thousands of dollars that I didn't have. But I made a promise to myself that night. Whatever it took, Sarah would get her education. So I worked harder. I picked up extra shifts. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches so I could save every possible dollar. I wore the same 3 outfits for years, mending holes and pretending I liked the vintage look when people commented on my outdated clothes. I borrowed money when I had to, swallowed my pride, and begged for extensions on rent payments so I could keep putting money away for Sarah's future. And it worked. By the time Sarah graduated high school, I had managed to save almost $150,000. It was my life's work, my greatest achievement. Every dollar represented hours of my life, calluses on my hands, and dreams I'd given up so she could have hers. But here's what I never told her: I put all that money into a separate account with her name on it. I wanted to surprise her when she graduated college, to hand her the keys to her future without any strings attached. I wanted to see her face when she realized she could start her adult life debt-free, with a foundation I'd built for her one exhausting day at a time. The account was supposed to be our secret, my gift to her when the time was right. I checked on it regularly, watching it grow with interest, imagining the day I could tell her about it. But something else was happening that I didn't notice at first. Sarah had discovered the account. Somehow, she'd found out about the money, and she was watching it too. During her college years, I noticed she started pulling away from me. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. When she came home for holidays, she seemed distracted, always checking her phone, always eager to leave. I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up. They build their own lives. I shouldn't be clingy. But there were moments that stung. Like when she graduated college and barely acknowledged me at the ceremony. I'd driven 4 hours to get there, wearing the one nice dress I owned, my heart bursting with pride. But when they called her name and she walked across that stage, she looked right through me like I wasn't there. At the celebration dinner, she spent more time talking to her friends' parents than to me. "I'll be fine on my own now, Mom," she said that weekend, not quite meeting my eyes. "You don't need to worry about me anymore." I should have been happy. Wasn't that the whole point? To raise a daughter who could stand on her own 2 feet? But something in her tone made me feel like I was being dismissed, like my usefulness had expired along with her childhood. The phone calls became even more rare after that. Months would go by without hearing her voice. When I called her, she always seemed rushed, distracted. "I can't talk long, Mom. I'm really busy with work." Or, "Can I call you back later? I'm meeting friends for dinner." But the callback never came. The only time she seemed genuinely interested in talking was when money came up. She'd mention struggling with rent, or needing a new car, or having trouble making ends meet. And like a fool, I'd offer to help. I'd transfer money from my meager checking account, telling myself this was what mothers do. We help our children when they need it. But the money never seemed to be enough. There was always another crisis, another emergency that required my financial assistance. And Sarah never offered to pay me back. In fact, she seemed to expect it, like it was my obligation to support her even though she was a grown woman with a college degree and a good job. I remember one particularly painful conversation about 2 years ago. I'd been having trouble with my arthritis, and my medical bills were piling up. I mentioned to Sarah that I might need to cut back on helping her financially for a while. "You don't understand, Mom," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "I have real responsibilities now. Real bills. You're retired. What do you need money for anyway?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't retired by choice. I'd been forced to stop working when my arthritis got so bad I could barely hold a mop. And what did I need money for? Food. Medicine. Rent. The basic necessities of staying alive, apparently luxuries in her mind. But I swallowed my hurt and continued helping her, because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice. We give. We love unconditionally, even when that love isn't returned. Looking back now, I can see how the manipulation worked. Every phone call started with questions about my health, my life, but they felt hollow, like she was going through the motions. Then she'd casually mention her latest financial stress, never directly asking for help but making sure I knew she was struggling. And I'd offer to help before she even had to ask, because I was so grateful to feel needed, to have a reason for her to stay on the phone a little longer. The pattern became so predictable. Crisis, assistance, brief gratitude, then silence again until the next crisis. I was funding her life while slowly disappearing from it, and I was too blind to see it. There were signs I should have noticed. Like how she never invited me to visit her apartment. "It's really small and messy, Mom. You wouldn't be comfortable." Or how she'd change the subject whenever I asked about her friends or her social life. "You don't know them," was her standard response, as if that was reason enough to never introduce us. She forgot my 70th birthday. Not a card, not a call, not a text message. Nothing. I sat in this apartment all day, checking my phone every few minutes, making excuses for her in my mind. She's busy. She'll remember later. Time zones are confusing. But evening came, then night, then the next day, and still nothing. When I finally called her 3 days later, she acted like it was no big deal. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Work has been absolutely insane. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it is. I'd never been too busy to remember my mother's birthday, even when I was working 3 jobs and barely keeping my head above water. Some things are too important to forget, unless the person isn't important to you anymore. That's when I started to suspect that I'd become more of a financial resource than a mother to Sarah. The realization crept in slowly, like poison in my veins. Every interaction we'd had in recent years revolved around her needs, her problems, her financial struggles. When was the last time she'd asked about my life, my dreams, my fears? When was the last time she'd called just to hear my voice? I couldn't remember. The wedding announcement was just the final confirmation of what I'd been trying not to see. I was no longer part of her inner circle, her chosen family. I was just the woman who sent money when she needed it, conveniently invisible otherwise. But even knowing that, even feeling the sharp edges of that truth cutting into my heart, I still made excuses for her. Maybe she wanted a small wedding. Maybe it was a last-minute decision. Maybe she was planning to tell me afterward and we'd celebrate together. Those maybes kept me sane for about 48 hours. Then I found the envelope. I was cleaning out my kitchen drawer, looking for my old recipe book to make the apple pie Sarah used to love, when my fingers brushed against an envelope I didn't recognize. It was tucked behind my utility bills, plain white paper with my name written in handwriting that wasn't mine. Inside was a bank statement, but not one of mine. It was an account summary for Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, my daughter's full name. And the balance made my heart stop. $150,000. My hand shook as I read the details. This was the account I'd set up for her college fund, the secret savings I'd been building for years. But it wasn't secret anymore. Sarah had been accessing it, monitoring it, watching my sacrifices accumulate into her private fortune. The statement showed regular withdrawals over the past few years. Not small amounts, thousands of dollars at a time. Money she'd taken while simultaneously asking me for help with her expenses, letting me drain my own accounts to support her while she sat on a vast fortune I'd created through my blood, sweat, and tears. I felt sick. Physically, violently ill. I ran to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body rejecting the reality of what I'd discovered. Sarah hadn't just hidden the money from me, she'd been actively deceiving me, manipulating me into giving her even more while she hoarded my life savings. Every financial crisis she described was a lie. Every tearful phone call about struggling to pay rent was manipulation. Every time I'd skipped meals or delayed medical appointments so I could send her money, she'd already had access to more wealth than I'd ever possessed. The cruelest part was the timing. According to the statement, she'd made a massive withdrawal just 2 weeks before her wedding. $50,000. Enough to pay for an entire ceremony, catering, flowers, photography. She'd funded her wedding with my money while not even bothering to invite me. I sat on my bathroom floor and cried until I had no tears left. Not just crying, wailing, keening, making sounds I didn't know I was capable of producing. The grief was physical, like something vital had been ripped out of my chest. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for, the child I'd loved with every fiber of my being, had been systematically robbing me while pretending to care about me. When the crying finally stopped, I felt empty. Hollow. Like a shell of a person with nothing left inside. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the broken woman staring back. My eyes were swollen and red, my face drawn with exhaustion and betrayal. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in the span of an afternoon. That's when the anger started to creep in. A slow burn at first, just a tiny flame of indignation in the emptiness of my chest. How dare she? How dare she take the money I'd earned through decades of sacrifice and pretend it was hers? How dare she watch me struggle to pay my own bills while she lived comfortably off my labor? But the anger scared me. I'd spent so many years being grateful for whatever scraps of attention Sarah threw my way that feeling furious with her felt wrong, unnatural. Good mothers don't get angry with their children. Good mothers understand. Good mothers forgive. But what about good daughters? Don't they have obligations too? I walked back to my kitchen on unsteady legs and stared at that bank statement. The numbers seemed to burn themselves into my vision. $150,000. My life's work. My sacrifice. My love. And she'd been hiding it from me, spending it without my knowledge, lying to my face while I sent her my social security checks. For the first time in my adult life, I wanted to hurt someone the way they'd hurt me. I wanted Sarah to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the devastating realization that someone you love has been using you. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to discover that your whole relationship was built on lies. But I didn't know how. I'd never been cruel, never been vindictive. I'd been raised to turn the other cheek, to love unconditionally, to put family first no matter what. How do you unlearn 72 years of putting yourself last? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, staring at the photos of Sarah on my walls, wondering when the sweet child in those pictures had become someone I didn't recognize. When had love turned into manipulation? When had my daughter become my predator? I thought about calling her, confronting her about the money. But what would I say? I know you've been stealing from me. Would she deny it? Would she turn it around on me somehow, make me feel guilty for snooping, for not trusting her? The thought of another conversation where she made me feel small and foolish was unbearable. I couldn't handle being manipulated again, especially not now when I finally saw the truth. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I called the bank. My voice shook as I explained the situation to the customer service representative. I explained that I was the primary account holder, that the money was mine, and that I wanted to change the access permissions immediately. I need to restrict withdrawals, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite my trembling hands. No one should be able to access this account except me. The process was surprisingly simple. A few security questions, a new PIN code, and suddenly the $150,000 was mine again. Really mine. Sarah would find out the next time she tried to make a withdrawal, and for once, I wouldn't be there to solve her problem. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. For the first time in decades, I'd put my own needs first. I'd protected myself instead of protecting everyone else. It felt foreign and frightening and absolutely necessary. But I knew this was just the beginning. Sarah would find out about the account restrictions soon enough, and she'd call me. She'd demand explanations. She'd try to manipulate me into reversing my decision. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to stand up to her emotional blackmail. I thought about my neighbor Maria, the quiet woman next door who'd been nothing but kind to me for the past 10 years. She'd lost her husband around the same time Sarah started pulling away, and we'd formed a tentative friendship over shared grief and loneliness. Maria had been the one to check on me when I was sick, to bring me soup when I couldn't get to the grocery store, to simply sit with me when the apartment felt too quiet. Maybe it was time to lean on someone for once, instead of being everyone else's foundation. The next morning, I knocked on Maria's door. She answered in her bathrobe, her graying hair messy from sleep, but her face lit up when she saw me. "June. What a nice surprise. Come in, I just made coffee." Her apartment was the mirror image of mine, but it felt completely different. Warmer somehow. Plants thrived on every windowsill, colorful artwork covered the walls, and the scent of cinnamon and vanilla made the space feel like home in a way mine hadn't in years. "Maria," I said, accepting a steaming mug gratefully, "I need to tell someone what's happening to me. And I think I need help figuring out what to do next." She listened without judgment as I told her everything. The wedding announcement, the hidden money, the years of manipulation and lies. I showed her the bank statement with shaking hands, watching her face change from confusion to understanding to righteous anger on my behalf. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished, reaching across her small dining table to squeeze my hand. "Oh, June. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Her sympathy broke something loose in my chest, and I started crying again. But these tears felt different. Not the despairing sobs from yesterday, but something cleaner. Relief, maybe. The relief of finally telling someone the truth instead of making excuses for Sarah's behavior. "What should I do?" I asked when my crying slowed. "I don't know how to handle this. I've always just accepted whatever she did. I don't know how to stand up for myself." Maria was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "What do you want to happen, June? If you could wave a magic wand and fix the situation, what would that look like?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? I'd spent so many years focused on what Sarah wanted, what she needed, what would make her happy, that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have desires of my own. "I want her to acknowledge what she's done," I said slowly. "I want her to understand how much she's hurt me. I want her to see me as a person instead of just a source of money." "And if she can't do that?" Maria asked gently. "If she's not capable of seeing you that way?" The possibility hadn't occurred to me before. I'd always assumed that if I could just find the right words, the right approach, Sarah would realize her mistakes and we'd reconcile. But what if she didn't want to change? What if she preferred our relationship the way it was, with her taking and me giving? "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never considered that might be permanent." "You deserve respect, June," Maria said firmly. "From everyone, including your daughter. And if she can't give you that, then maybe it's time to create a life that doesn't depend on her approval." The idea was revolutionary to me. A life that didn't revolve around Sarah's needs and moods? A life where I mattered just as much as everyone else? It seemed impossible and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. "How do I even start?" I asked. "One boundary at a time," Maria said. "You've already started by protecting your money. What's the next thing you need to protect?" I thought about it. "My peace of mind, I guess. I'm tired of walking on eggshells, tired of making excuses for her behavior. I'm tired of feeling guilty for having needs." "Then stop," Maria said simply. "Stop making excuses. Stop feeling guilty. Stop accepting treatment that you wouldn't tolerate from a stranger." It sounded so simple when she said it. But I knew it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. Over the next few days, I started practicing small acts of self-preservation. When Sarah called, and she did call, furious about the restricted bank account, I didn't automatically apologize. Instead, I said, "We need to talk about this in person. Are you available to meet this weekend?" Her response was predictable. Anger, followed by accusations, followed by emotional manipulation. "I can't believe you don't trust me, Mom. After everything we've been through together? I thought the money was for both of us to use." Both of us? As if she'd contributed even a single dollar to that account. As if her name being on it meant she'd earned the right to spend my life savings without my knowledge. "The money is mine, Sarah," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I earned it. I saved it. And I have the right to control how it's spent. But I'm your daughter. Family is supposed to help family." "You're right," I agreed. "Family is supposed to help family. But help goes both ways. When was the last time you helped me with anything?" The question hung in the air between us. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to come up with an answer that didn't make her look selfish. I've been busy, Mom. You know how demanding my job is." "Too busy to invite me to your wedding?" Silence. "Too busy to call on my birthday?" More silence. "Too busy to ask how I'm doing when you call to ask for money?" "That's not fair," she said finally, but her voice had lost its angry edge. "You're making me sound like some kind of monster." "I'm not trying to make you sound like anything. I'm just stating facts. And the fact is, our relationship has become very one-sided. I give, you take, and I never complain because I'm afraid of losing you. But Sarah, I think I've already lost you. I just didn't want to admit it." The truth of those words hit me as I spoke them. I had lost her, probably years ago. The Sarah I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was the best mom in the world, had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could lie to my face while stealing from me, someone who could get married without even telling me it was happening. "We need to meet," I said again. "Face to face. There are things we need to discuss that can't be handled over the phone." She agreed, reluctantly, to meet me at a small cafe in Manhattan the following Saturday. I spent the days leading up to that meeting in a strange state of nervous anticipation. Part of me hoped we could work things out, that she'd apologize and we'd find our way back to each other. But a larger part of me, the part that was growing stronger every day, knew this meeting would be an ending rather than a beginning. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the window where I could watch the street. New York moved past in its usual chaotic rhythm, pedestrians hurrying past, taxis honking, delivery bikes weaving through traffic. The city's energy used to overwhelm me, but that day it felt supportive somehow. All of us just trying to navigate our complicated lives, all of us deserving basic respect and dignity. Sarah arrived 10 minutes late, which was typical for her. She slid into the seat across from me with a forced smile, air-kissing me like we were acquaintances rather than mother and daughter. "You look good, Mom," she said, though her eyes were already scanning the room, looking for escape routes. "Thank you. You look beautiful, as always." She did look beautiful. Success suited her. Her hair was professionally styled, her clothes expensive, her manicure perfect. Looking at her, no one would guess she'd been crying poverty to her elderly mother for years. "So," she said, fidgeting with her coffee cup, "about the bank account thing. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Well, you put my name on the account, right? So technically, it's my money too. I mean, I know you saved it, but you saved it for me, didn't you?" The casual way she said it, like she was explaining something obvious to a confused child, made my blood pressure spike. But I kept my voice level. "I saved that money as a college fund for you. It was supposed to be a graduation gift. But you found out about it and started using it without my knowledge or permission." "I didn't use that much," she said defensively. "And it was for important things. My rent, my car payment, necessary expenses." $50,000 for your wedding?" Her face went pale. "How did you?" "I saw the bank statement, Sarah. I know exactly how much you've taken and when you took it. What I don't understand is why you let me struggle to help you with expenses when you were sitting on more money than I've ever had at one time." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't want to spend it all at once. I was trying to be responsible, to make it last." "By lying to me? By letting me skip meals so I could send you money you didn't need?" "I never asked you to skip meals. You never asked about my meals at all. You never asked about my health, my bills, my life. The only time you call me is when you need something." Her composure cracked a little. "That's not true. I care about you." "Then why wasn't I invited to your wedding?" The question hung between us like a blade. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she managed to answer. "It was a small ceremony. Very intimate. We only invited immediate family. I am immediate family. I'm your mother." "I know, but..." She trailed off, clearly struggling to find an explanation that didn't sound heartless. But what, Sarah? But I'm not important enough? But I might embarrass you? But it was easier to use my money to pay for it than to actually include me in it. Tears started forming in her eyes, and for a moment I felt the familiar urge to comfort her, to take back my words and make her feel better. But I forced myself to stay seated, to let her feel uncomfortable for once. It wasn't about you, Mom. It was about us wanting something simple and private. Your wedding photos show at least 50 people. Those were just friends and family who matter more than I do. She started crying then, the kind of manipulative tears I'd seen 1,000 times before. The tears that used to make me immediately apologize and comfort her, regardless of what she'd done wrong. But this time, I sat quietly and waited for her to compose herself. I handed her a napkin but didn't offer soothing words or reassurances. Let her feel the weight of her own actions for once. "I'm sorry," she said when the tears stopped. "I know I should have told you about the wedding. It happened so fast, and I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd want to be there for one of the most important days of your life?" "No, I just didn't think, period. I was caught up in the excitement and..." Her excuses sounded hollow even to her. I could see her realizing that there was no good explanation for what she'd done, no way to make her behavior seem reasonable or kind. "Sarah," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. I'm not angry about the money because I need it back. I'm angry because you lied to me. You manipulated me. You let me worry about your financial situation while you were sitting on a fortune I'd created for you. I was trying to save it for something important. More important than your elderly mother's peace of mind? More important than letting me keep enough of my social security check to pay for my medications." She had no answer for that. I reached into my purse and pulled out an old photograph, one of her as a child, sitting on my lap, both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. I'd carried it in my wallet for years, a reminder of better times when we genuinely loved each other. Without breaking eye contact, I slowly tore the photograph in half. Sarah gasped. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because that little girl doesn't exist anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "And I need to stop pretending she does." I stood up, leaving the torn pieces on the table between us. I will not continue to fund a relationship where I'm treated like an ATM instead of a person. I will not accept being lied to, manipulated, or ignored. I deserve better than that, even if you can't see it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine care. Not financial transactions. Not obligation. Not guilt." Her face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, fear, and something that might have been genuine remorse. "And if I can't do that," she asked quietly, "then we don't have a relationship worth preserving." The words felt like they were tearing my heart out, but they also felt true. Necessary. Long overdue. I walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving Sarah sitting alone with the pieces of our broken past. My hands were shaking as I hailed a taxi, but there was something else mixed in with the pain. Relief, maybe. Or the faint beginning of freedom. The next few weeks were complicated. Sarah called several times, alternating between anger and pleading. She tried different strategies, reminiscing about good times we'd shared, promising to change, enlisting other family members to guilt me into reconciling. My ex-husband called, his voice dripping with disapproval. "June, what's gotten into you? Family is family. You can't just cut off your own daughter." "I haven't cut her off," I replied calmly. "I've just stopped enabling her. She's hurt, June. She says you're being unreasonable." "I'm sure she does." "Did she mention the $150,000 she's been hiding from me? Did she explain why I wasn't invited to her wedding?" His silence told me everything I needed to know. Sarah had painted me as the villain in her version of events, conveniently leaving out the parts that made her look bad. "There are always two sides to every story," he said finally. "You're right. And for the first time in decades, you're hearing mine." I hung up feeling stronger than I had in years. Each conversation where I refused to be manipulated, each time I stated my boundaries clearly and calmly, I felt a little more like myself again. Maria was an incredible source of support during this time. She listened without judgment, offered practical advice, and most importantly, reminded me that I was worth fighting for. "You're like a different person," she told me one evening as we shared tea in her apartment. "You're standing straighter. Your voice is stronger. This transformation is beautiful to watch." "It doesn't feel beautiful," I admitted. "It feels terrifying most of the time. The best changes usually do." I started making small changes to my daily routine. Instead of checking my phone constantly for messages from Sarah, I put it in a drawer for hours at a time. Instead of staying home every night, I started taking evening walks through my neighborhood, rediscovering streets I'd lived near for years but never really explored. I visited the community center in Brooklyn that Maria had recommended, looking into programs for seniors. There were art classes, book clubs, volunteer opportunities, a whole world of activities I'd never considered because I'd been too focused on Sarah's needs to think about my own interests. The transformation wasn't just internal. I started paying attention to my appearance again, not for anyone else's approval but because I deserved to feel good about myself. I bought new clothes, nothing expensive, but items that fit properly and made me feel confident. I got my hair cut in a style that flattered my face instead of just pulling it back in the same tired ponytail I'd worn for years. 1 month after our confrontation at the cafe, I did something I'd never done in my adult life. I planned a trip for myself. It wasn't elaborate, just a weekend in Philadelphia to visit museums and historical sites I'd always wanted to see. But it was mine. I didn't ask anyone's permission, didn't check if it was convenient for anyone else's schedule, didn't worry about whether I deserved to spend money on myself. I just booked the train ticket and the hotel room and started looking forward to my first solo adventure. The feeling was intoxicating. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based solely on what would make me happy. Not what would keep peace in the family, not what would avoid conflict, not what would make me seem like a good mother. Just what would bring me joy. 2 days before my planned trip, everything changed again. I woke up to discover that someone had posted about me on social media. Not Sarah directly, but someone in her circle, maybe her new husband, maybe one of her friends. The post painted me as a bitter, selfish old woman who'd stolen money from her own daughter and abandoned her family out of spite. The lies were breathtaking in their cruelty. According to the post, I'd promised Sarah the money for her wedding, then changed my mind at the last minute out of jealousy. I was described as mentally unstable, possibly suffering from dementia, definitely not someone who should be trusted to make financial decisions. The post had been shared dozens of times, with comments from people I didn't even know calling me names, questioning my sanity, and expressing sympathy for my poor daughter, who'd been victimized by her crazy mother. Reading those comments felt like being physically assaulted. Strangers were making judgments about my character based on lies, painting me as the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. The humiliation was overwhelming, not just because of the lies themselves, but because of how easily people believed them. For about an hour, I was devastated. The old June would have immediately called Sarah, apologizing for whatever I'd done wrong, begging for forgiveness, offering to fix everything if she'd just make the online attacks stop. But I wasn't the old June anymore. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my favorite chair, and really thought about what was happening. Sarah and her allies were trying to publicly shame me into submission. They were counting on my desire to avoid conflict, my fear of being disliked, my ingrained need to keep peace at any cost. But what they didn't understand was that I'd already lost everything I'd been afraid of losing. I'd already been excluded from Sarah's life, already been treated with contempt and disrespect, already been reduced to nothing more than a financial resource in her mind. Their online attacks couldn't take away anything I still had, because I'd already been discarded. All they could do was make that discarding public, and honestly, part of me was grateful for the clarity. Now I knew exactly who Sarah was and what she was capable of. Now I had proof that her cruelty wasn't accidental or temporary, it was calculated and deliberate. I screenshotted the posts and comments, not to use them against her but to remind myself whenever I felt tempted to go back. This was who she really was when she thought I might stand up for myself. This was what she did when I stopped being convenient. Then I deleted my social media accounts entirely. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need that kind of toxicity in my life. I had better things to do with my time than defend myself against lies to people who wanted to believe them anyway. My phone rang almost immediately. Sarah, probably expecting me to be sobbing and desperate to reconcile after her public humiliation campaign. I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times that day. I didn't answer any of the calls, but I did listen to the voicemails. They started angry, accusing me of ignoring her, demanding that I call her back immediately to discuss this situation like adults. But when I didn't respond, her tone changed. The later messages were softer, more manipulative. "Mom, I'm worried about you. People are saying concerning things about your mental health. Maybe we should have you evaluated, just to make sure you're okay." The implication was clear. If I didn't cooperate with her demands, she'd have me declared mentally incompetent. It was probably an empty threat, she'd need proof I couldn't take care of myself, which obviously wasn't true. But it showed me how far she was willing to go to get control of my money again. I saved all the voicemails, just in case I needed them later. That evening, Maria knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "I saw what they posted about you online," she said without preamble. "Before you deleted your accounts, I mean. I took screenshots in case you need them for legal purposes." "Legal purposes? Honey, what they did is harassment. Maybe even defamation. You don't have to just accept it." The idea hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on protecting myself emotionally that I hadn't considered the legal implications of Sarah's behavior. "I don't want to sue my own daughter," I said. I'm not talking about suing. I'm talking about documenting. In case this escalates, in case she tries to have you declared incompetent or get control of your finances some other way. You need proof that you're thinking clearly and that she's been manipulating you. Maria was right. I needed to protect myself not just emotionally but legally. The next morning, I called the lawyer the community center had recommended and made an appointment. Attorney Rebecca Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more grim as I described Sarah's behavior. "This is financial elder abuse," she said when I finished. "What your daughter has been doing, taking money without your knowledge, manipulating you into giving her more, using emotional blackmail to control your decisions, it's a form of abuse that's unfortunately very common." The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking of Sarah's behavior as selfish or thoughtless, but abuse seemed too strong a term for what was happening between us. "I can see you're struggling with that word," Ms. Martinez said gently. "A lot of people in your situation do. We think of abuse as physical violence, but emotional and financial abuse can be just as damaging. And it sounds like you've been experiencing both." She helped me understand my legal options, which were more extensive than I'd realized. I could pursue charges for financial theft, file restraining orders if the harassment continued, and most importantly, I could legally protect my assets from future manipulation. "The most important thing right now is documentation," she said. "Keep records of all communication, all financial transactions, all threats or intimidation. If this situation escalates, you'll need proof of the pattern of behavior." I left her office feeling both empowered and exhausted. Empowered because I finally understood that I had rights, that what was happening to me wasn't just a difficult family situation but actual abuse. Exhausted because I was 72 years old and shouldn't have to be learning how to protect myself from my own daughter. But I was learning, and that was what mattered. Over the next few weeks, something incredible happened. The silence in my life, which had once felt oppressive and lonely, began to feel peaceful. Without the constant stress of managing Sarah's crises, without the emotional exhaustion of trying to earn her love, I had energy for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center. My first attempts were terrible, shaky lines, muddy colors, compositions that made no sense. But the instructor, a patient woman named Helen, encouraged all her students to focus on the joy of creation rather than the quality of results. "Art isn't about perfection," she said during one class. "It's about expression. It's about taking what's inside you and putting it on paper, whether it's beautiful or messy or somewhere in between." I found myself thinking about that philosophy beyond just painting. My life didn't have to be perfect to be valuable. My relationships didn't have to be flawless to be worth having. I could express myself, my needs, my boundaries, my feelings, even if the results were messy or uncomfortable for other people. Maria and I started taking weekly trips to different neighborhoods in New York, exploring areas we'd never visited despite living in the city our entire lives. We rode the subway to Queens and walked through Flushing Meadows Park. We visited museums in Brooklyn, tried new restaurants in the Bronx, spent entire afternoons in Central Park just watching people live their lives. These adventures were revelatory for me. I'd spent so many years focused on other people's needs that I'd forgotten New York City was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. The city I'd lived in for decades suddenly felt new and full of possibilities. One sunny Saturday, Maria and I took the train out to Coney Island. I hadn't been there since Sarah was a child, and walking along the boardwalk brought back memories of simpler times. But instead of making me sad, those memories felt like gifts, proof that I'd been a good mother, that I'd created joy for my daughter even if she chose not to remember it now. We rode the Cyclone roller coaster, laughing like teenagers as our hair whipped around our faces. We shared funnel cake and played arcade games, acting decades younger than our ages. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Not just content or resigned, but actively joyful. "You know what I love about this?" Maria said as we sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "What? We're not waiting for permission to enjoy ourselves. We're not checking with anyone to see if it's okay to spend this money or take this time. We're just living our lives because we want to." She was right. For most of my adult life, I'd felt like I needed justification for any pleasure, any expense that wasn't absolutely necessary. I'd asked permission from people who never asked permission from me, sacrificed my own joy for people who wouldn't sacrifice their convenience for my happiness. But sitting there watching the waves roll in, cotton candy dissolving on my tongue, the warm weight of genuine friendship beside me, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed, the simple pleasure of being alive. That night, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I went through my apartment and took down all the photos of Sarah. Not because I wanted to erase the memories, some of them were genuinely precious, but because I didn't want shrines to someone who treated me badly dominating my living space. Instead, I put up photos from my recent adventures with Maria. Pictures of us laughing at museums, trying on silly hats at street fairs, looking proud and happy and fully present in our own lives. These images told a different story, not of sacrifice and service, but of friendship and joy in new beginnings. I bought plants for my windowsills, bright flowers that needed daily care and attention. Taking care of them felt like practice for taking care of myself, noticing what they needed, providing it consistently, watching them thrive under proper treatment. 3 months after our confrontation at the cafe, Sarah tried one final manipulation attempt. She showed up at my building without warning, buzzing my intercom with the desperate persistence of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. When I answered, her voice was shaky and small. "Mom? It's Sarah. Can I come up? Please? I need to talk to you." Every instinct I'd developed over 7 decades told me to buzz her up immediately. She sounded upset, maybe hurt. My maternal programming kicked in, demanding that I comfort her regardless of how she'd treated me. But I'd learned to recognize that programming for what it was, a conditioned response that had been used against me for years. "What do you want to talk about, Sarah?" I made some mistakes. I want to apologize. I want to fix things between us." The words I'd been longing to hear for years. But by then, I'd learned to listen to actions rather than words, to judge people by their consistent behavior rather than their crisis promises. "What mistakes?" I asked. "All of them. The money, the wedding, the way I've treated you. I know I messed up, and I want to make it right." "How?" The question seemed to stump her. I waited, listening to the static of the intercom, hearing her struggle to find an answer that sounded sincere. I'll pay back the money I took. And I'll be better about calling, and visiting, and including you in things." It was the apology I dreamed of, but it felt hollow. There was no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, no real understanding of how her behavior had affected me. Just promises designed to get her what she wanted, access to my apartment, my attention, and eventually, my money again. "Sarah," I said gently, "I appreciate you coming here. But apologies without changed behavior are just words. And I've heard a lot of words from you over the years. But I mean it this time. I really want to change. Then prove it. Not to me, but to yourself. Spend some time thinking about why you treated me the way you did. Consider getting therapy to work on whatever made you think it was acceptable to lie to your mother and steal from her. When you've done that work, really done it, not just said you would, then maybe we can have a conversation about rebuilding our relationship. How long will that take?" The question revealed everything. She wasn't interested in actually changing, she was looking for the minimum effort required to get back in my good graces. She wanted a timeline, a roadmap, a guarantee that if she jumped through the right hoops for the right amount of time, she'd get access to my resources again. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe months. Maybe years. Maybe never. That depends entirely on how committed you are to becoming the kind of person who deserves a relationship with me." "But Mom, I love you, Sarah. I will always love you. But love without respect isn't a relationship, it's just emotional servitude. And I'm done being anyone's servant." I hung up the intercom and watched from my window as she stood on the sidewalk for a long time, probably processing the reality that her old manipulation tactics no longer worked on me. Eventually, she walked away, and I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. The sadness was real, grief for the relationship we'd never had, mourning for the daughter who might have existed in different circumstances. But the relief was stronger. Relief that I'd held my boundaries, that I'd chosen my own well-being over her convenience, that I'd finally learned to love myself enough to demand better treatment. That night, I called Maria to tell her what had happened. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the immediate honesty of the answer. "Sad, but free. That's the perfect combination for a new beginning." She was right. Freedom always comes with a price, and the price is often saying goodbye to familiar patterns that no longer serve us. But the alternative, staying trapped in dysfunction out of fear of loneliness, was no longer acceptable to me. 6 months after everything began, I threw myself a party. Not a pity party, an actual celebration. I invited Maria, my new friends from art class, neighbors I'd started getting to know, and people from the community center who'd become part of my support network. We gathered in my transformed apartment, now bright and colorful and filled with evidence of a life being actively lived. Plants thrived on every surface, my amateur paintings covered the walls, and books from the library book club were stacked neatly on tables. "What are we celebrating?" asked Helen, my art instructor. "My 73rd birthday," I said. "And my first year of putting myself first." We laughed and shared stories and ate too much cake. These people who saw value in me beyond what I could provide for them, filled my apartment with warmth and joy in a way it had never experienced before. Looking around the room, I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation and guilt and unequal sacrifice, but mutual care and genuine affection and celebration of each other's successes. As the evening wound down and my guests prepared to leave, Maria pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, she said quietly. "What you've done this year, standing up for yourself, rebuilding your life, learning to value yourself, it's incredible. You've inspired all of us." Her words meant more to me than any compliment I'd ever received, because they came from someone who truly knew me. Someone who'd watched me transform from a woman who apologized for existing into someone who celebrated her own survival. After everyone left, I sat in my peaceful apartment and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who discovered those wedding photos on social media felt like someone from another life, someone smaller, sadder, more willing to disappear. I thought about Sarah occasionally, usually with a mixture of love and pity. Love for the child she'd been, pity for the adult she'd become. I hoped she was happy in whatever life she'd built for herself, but I no longer felt responsible for ensuring that happiness at the cost of my own. The money she'd hidden was still in the restricted account, growing with interest, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I'd considered several options: donating it to charities that helped abused elderly people, using it to travel and see parts of the world I'd only dreamed of, or simply keeping it as security for my own future care. Whatever I decided, the choice would be mine alone. No one would manipulate me into spending it on them, no one would make me feel guilty for having resources, no one would treat me like an ATM instead of a human being. That realization was worth more than any amount of money. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, the same mirror where I'd seen a broken woman just months before. The face looking back at me now was different. Still lined with age, still marked by decades of hard work and sacrifice, but no longer defeated. My eyes were clearer, my posture straighter, my expression more peaceful. I looked like someone who knew her own worth, someone who wouldn't accept less than she deserved, someone who'd learned the difference between love and exploitation. I looked like someone who'd survived. The next morning brought new possibilities, as every morning did now. I had art class in the afternoon, dinner plans with Maria in the evening, and a whole life that belonged entirely to me stretching out ahead. I made coffee in my quiet kitchen, listening to the familiar sounds of New York waking up outside my window. But the sounds didn't feel like background noise anymore, they felt like music, the soundtrack to a life that had meaning beyond serving other people's needs. My phone sat silent on the counter, no longer a source of anxiety or hope. Whether it rang or didn't ring, whether Sarah called or didn't call, whether my old life tried to reclaim me or left me alone, none of that could touch the peace I'd built for myself. I'd learned that love without respect is manipulation, that family isn't determined by blood but by behavior, and that it's never too late to choose yourself. These weren't easy lessons, and learning them had cost me relationships I'd valued for decades. But the alternative, continuing to live as a ghost in my own life, continuing to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for my dignity, had cost me something far more precious, myself. Now, at 73 years old, I was finally free to discover who June was when she wasn't busy being everyone else's solution. Free to have preferences and boundaries and dreams that didn't involve anyone else's approval. Free to build a life that reflected my own values instead of other people's expectations. Some mornings I woke up amazed that this transformation was possible at my age, that someone could spend 70 years living one way and then completely reinvent herself almost overnight. Other mornings I woke up amazed that it had taken me so long, that I'd waited until the final chapters of my life to start actually living it. Both feelings were valid. Both were part of the complex emotional landscape of someone who'd survived emotional abuse and come out stronger on the other side. What matters most is that I did survive. I did change. I did learn to value myself enough to demand better treatment, even when that meant walking away from people I loved who couldn't or wouldn't love me back properly. And if my story sounds familiar to you, if there's someone in your life who treats you like a resource instead of a person, who demands your sacrifice without offering their respect, who makes you feel grateful for the bare minimum of human decency, please know that it's never too late to choose differently. You deserve better than that. You deserve relationships built on mutual care, not one-sided service. You deserve to be seen and valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. You deserve to matter in your own life. It took me 7 decades to learn these truths, but once I did, everything changed. The loneliness I'd been so afraid of turned out to be solitude, which is something entirely different. Solitude is peaceful. Solitude is chosen. Solitude is the foundation from which genuine connections can grow. The relationships I have now, with Maria, with my new friends, with the community I've built around myself, are deeper and more authentic than any I had when I was desperately trying to buy love with my service and sacrifice. These people choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they need something from me. That's the difference between love and exploitation, and once you experience the real thing, you can never go back to accepting counterfeits. As the months continued to pass, I found myself discovering aspects of my personality that had been buried for decades under layers of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. I had opinions about art, about books, about politics that I'd never allowed myself to voice because I was too busy agreeing with whatever would keep the peace. I had preferences for how I spent my time that had nothing to do with what anyone else needed from me. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, teaching adults how to read. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways I'd never experienced before. These students saw me as someone with valuable skills to offer, not as a source of financial assistance or emotional labor. They thanked me for my time and effort, and their gratitude felt genuine because it was based on something I was choosing to give, not something I was being manipulated into providing. One of my students, a woman named Carmen who was learning to read so she could help her grandchildren with their homework, reminded me of myself in some ways. She'd spent decades putting everyone else's needs first, and only now, in her 60s, was she finally doing something just for herself. My family thinks I'm crazy, she told me one afternoon as we worked through a particularly difficult passage. They say, "Why do you need to read? You've gotten this far without it." But I want more than just getting by. I want to understand things for myself, not just have other people tell me what things say. Her words resonated deeply with me. For so many years, I'd let other people tell me what my relationships meant, what my value was, what I should accept as normal. I'd stopped trusting my own judgment, my own instincts, my own understanding of what was happening to me. Learning to trust myself again was perhaps the most challenging part of this whole transformation. Every time I made a decision based on my own desires rather than someone else's expectations, a little voice in my head would whisper that I was being selfish, that I was disappointing people, that I wasn't being a good person. But gradually, that voice got quieter. It was replaced by a different understanding, that taking care of myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. That disappointing people who had unreasonable expectations wasn't a failure on my part, it was a healthy boundary. That being a good person didn't require me to disappear into other people's needs. About 8 months after I'd last spoken to Sarah, I received a letter in the mail. Not from her, but from her husband, the man I'd never met, whose existence I'd only learned about through wedding photos on social media. His name was David, and his letter was polite but formal. He explained that Sarah had been struggling with the estrangement from me, that she'd been depressed and anxious since our last confrontation. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do to help us reconcile, if there were any conditions under which I might be willing to rebuild our relationship. The letter was kind, and I could see that he genuinely cared about Sarah's well-being. But it also revealed something telling: Sarah still hadn't taken responsibility for her actions. She hadn't sent the letter herself, hadn't done the hard work of examining her behavior and making genuine amends. Instead, she'd enlisted her husband to try a different approach to the same goal, getting back into my good graces without actually changing. I wrote back to David, thanking him for his concern and explaining, as gently as I could, that reconciliation wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about changed behavior, genuine accountability, and mutual respect. I told him that I hoped Sarah would find peace and happiness, but that I couldn't be responsible for managing her emotions about the consequences of her own choices. I never heard back from him, and I didn't expect to. My response had probably made it clear that I wasn't going to be an easy solution to Sarah's problems. Around the same time, I made a decision about the money that had started this whole journey. I'd been carrying the weight of that $150,000 for months, unsure what to do with it but certain I didn't want to return it to someone who had stolen it from me. After talking with Maria and my lawyer and doing a lot of soul-searching, I decided to donate a significant portion of it to organizations that helped elderly people who were being financially abused by their families. It felt right to take money that had been used to hurt me and transform it into something that could help other people in similar situations. I kept some of it for myself, enough to ensure my own financial security and to fund some of the dreams I'd put on hold for so long. The trip to Philadelphia had been wonderful, and I was planning more adventures. Maybe Europe, maybe just different states I'd never visited. The point wasn't the destination, it was the freedom to choose my own path. I also used some of the money to improve my living situation. Not by moving, I'd grown to love my little apartment and the neighborhood that had become home, but by making it more comfortable and beautiful. I hired someone to fix the crack in my window that had bothered me for years. I bought a comfortable new chair to replace the worn one Sarah used to sit in. I invested in better lighting and some plants that brought life and color to every room. These weren't extravagant purchases, but they represented something revolutionary for me, spending money on my own comfort and happiness without guilt, without justification, without asking anyone's permission. 1 year after the wedding photos had shattered my world, I was sitting in that same kitchen where I discovered the bank statement that changed everything. But the kitchen looked different now, brighter, more welcoming, more like a place where someone who mattered lived. I was preparing dinner for Maria and a few other friends from my art class. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and good conversation. But as I stirred the sauce and set the table, I marveled at how different this felt from all those evenings I'd spent alone, waiting for a phone call that rarely came. The difference wasn't just in the company, though that was certainly part of it. The difference was in how I saw myself. I was no longer a woman waiting to be needed, hoping to be chosen, willing to accept whatever scraps of attention people were willing to give me. I was someone with my own life, my own interests, my own value that existed independently of what I could do for other people. When the doorbell rang and my friends arrived with flowers and wine and warm smiles, I felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with their approval of me. I was happy to see them, not because I was desperate for company, but because I genuinely enjoyed their friendship and they enjoyed mine. Over dinner, Helen asked about my experience with what she called my year of transformation. "What's the biggest thing you've learned?" she wanted to know. I thought about it for a moment, watching these wonderful women who had become such an important part of my life. Women who saw me clearly, who valued my thoughts and opinions, who respected my boundaries and appreciated my company. "I think I learned that I was afraid of the wrong thing," I said finally. "I was terrified of being alone, of being unloved, of not mattering to anyone. So I accepted relationships where I was taken for granted, where I was treated poorly, where I had to constantly prove my worth through what I could give. But it turns out that real loneliness isn't being by yourself. Real loneliness is being with people who don't really see you, who only value you for what you can provide them. And real love isn't something you have to earn or buy or sacrifice yourself for. Real love is freely given and received, based on who you are, not what you can do." Maria raised her wine glass. "To learning the difference," she said. To learning the difference, we all echoed, and I felt the warmth of genuine connection, genuine friendship, genuine love. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the dishes, I found myself thinking about Sarah again. Not with the sharp pain that had once accompanied thoughts of her, but with a kind of sad acceptance. I wondered if she was happy, if she'd learned anything from our estrangement, if she'd ever understand what she'd given up when she chose money over relationship. But these thoughts didn't consume me the way they once had. Sarah's happiness or unhappiness was no longer my responsibility. I'd done my job as her mother, I'd raised her, loved her, provided for her, given her every opportunity to become a good person. The choices she made as an adult were hers to make and hers to live with. My job now was to live my own life fully and authentically, to nurture the relationships that deserved my energy, and to continue growing into the person I was meant to be. As I finished washing the dishes and prepared for bed, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The woman who had woken up to wedding photos and felt her world collapse seemed like a stranger to me now. Not because I'd forgotten the pain, that kind of heartbreak leaves permanent marks, but because I'd transformed that pain into something useful. Something that taught me about my own strength, my own worth, my own capacity for survival and growth. I walked to my bathroom mirror again, the same mirror that had shown me a broken woman a year ago. The face looking back at me now was peaceful, confident, alive with possibility. Still 73 years old, still marked by decades of hard work and sacrifice, but no longer defined by other people's treatment of me. I looked like a woman who had learned to love herself, who had discovered that her own approval was more important than anyone else's, who had built a life worth living, surrounded by people who appreciated her for exactly who she was. I looked like a survivor. The next morning, as I prepared to start my second year of this new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about the future. Not excitement about what other people might do for me or how they might include me in their lives, but excitement about what I might discover about myself, what adventures I might have, what contributions I might make to the world. I had plans now. Real plans that belonged entirely to me. I was going to take that trip to Europe I'd always dreamed of. I was going to expand my volunteer work with the literacy program. I was going to continue developing my painting skills and maybe even have a small show of my work at the community center. These weren't grand ambitions, but they felt monumental to me because they represented something I'd never had before: a life lived for my own sake, guided by my own interests, funded by my own choices. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine, where someone you loved treated you as a convenience rather than a person? Have you ever wondered if you were being too sensitive, too demanding, too selfish for wanting basic respect and consideration? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories help me remember that none of us are alone in these struggles. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is share our truth, even when it's painful, because it helps other people feel less isolated in their own difficult situations. I want you to know that if you're living in relationships where you're not treated with basic respect, where your value is measured only by what you can provide, where you're made to feel grateful for the bare minimum of human decency, you deserve better. You have always deserved better, even if no one has told you so. Change is possible at any age, in any circumstance. It's never too late to start valuing yourself enough to demand better treatment. It's never too late to discover who you really are when you're not busy being everyone else's solution. The loneliness you're afraid of might actually be solitude, which is peaceful and chosen and full of possibility. The relationships you think you can't live without might be preventing you from finding the connections you actually deserve. If this story touched you, if it helped you see your own situation more clearly, or if it gave you hope that transformation is possible no matter how stuck you feel, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me reach other people who might need to hear these words, who might need permission to put themselves first for once in their lives. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain and my transformation. Thank you for reminding me that sharing our truth, even when it's difficult, can be a gift to others who are still finding their way. Remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and dignity. You always have been, even if nobody told you so. It's never too late to start believing it.